You're tuned in to the Dr. Kinney Show, and I'm your host, Dr. Erin Kinney, a naturopathic doctor and speaker dedicated to unraveling the mysteries of your body and guiding you back into balance. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Kinney Show. This week, I'm really pleased to have back on the show our favorite health coach at the Kinney Clinic, Carrie Chojnowski, who is a certified health coach and a holistic gut practitioner, and she just geeks out on all things gut health, and it's so fantastic to have her knowledge and, as in the clinic and on the show. I'm so grateful to have her here. She also has her own podcast, which we'll share a little bit at the end. You can go listen to her more if you enjoy the conversation. Carrie, thanks for coming back on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah.
Always happy to be here.
Yeah.
Always happy to geek out with you.
We had her on not too long ago, so if you want to go re-listen to that episode, you can. But do you want to share a little bit about your journey again? We can kind of start off with that.
Yeah, sure. So my journey doing this work really started with my own health journey, like many of us who are in this line of work. I was a 40-year-old woman who was really struggling with so many chronic issues. I had multiple food sensitivities, chronic IBS that was pretty much on its way to being colitis. I was anxious. I had back issues, chronic spasms in my back, chronic pain, all the things that I was seeing many practitioners for, or many different specialists for, and wasn't really making progress. After 2 years of taking a lot of medications and really kind of feeling like I was on the hamster wheel of therapies, I finally started to learn about gut health and how that influences inflammation in your body, and started addressing it through some supplementation, some really effective supplements that I love, and changing my diet, changing some different areas in my life. And lo and behold, started to feel a lot better. And about 4 months into taking the supplements and doing that work, one of my osteopathic doctor at the time was like, "What are you doing? Because I've been working with you for 2.5 years, and I don't know what's different, because we have done everything." And I was like, "I don't know, I'm taking these supplements, I'm doing this." And he was like, "Girl, you are on the right path. Just keep doing what you're doing." I was taking prednisone regularly for my back spasms, and that really wrecked my hormones, wrecked everything, and I had to be on it. Like every 6 weeks, I had little kids at home. I had to function. My husband traveled. And so I did what I had to do. But once I knew better and I started implementing, these gut health strategies, it was like everything changed.
And completely life-changing.
Completely life-changing. I haven't been on prednisone since.
Amazing.
That was almost 8 years ago. And as I started to feel better, I started to look at other areas of my life and realized how stressful my work environment was. I was a speech pathologist working with the deaf community, and there's just a lot of politics, and it was really, really stressful. I loved the work I did with the families. I loved the work I did with, the kids, and it was so great, but there was so much politics, and that was keeping me sick. Like there was that piece of me that was just always stressed out and always dreading my work. And so my husband at the time, well, he's still my husband, but at the time we were thinking about moving. And I was like, if you move our family to from Maine to Maryland, I'm going to dig into this passion of gut health, and I'm going to become a health coach. And he was like, whatever works, whatever makes you happy. So
good husband.
Good husband. Exactly. And so I got my gut health certification, got my health coaching certification, and here I am. So
it's awesome. And now you've helped so many others with similar struggles that you had.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I mean, it's just like amazing. Like the power that our body has to heal itself when given the right tools.
Yeah. And I really like your story, because I think you touch on a lot of topics that sometimes people don't realize how much of an impact a stressful work environment can have on your health.
Totally.
And specifically on your gut health. Like this comes up a lot with my patient. I specialize in treating patients with, high levels of stress, and we see so many gut issues, which we're going to talk about today. Your gut gets out of whack. It can then start to downstream cause effects with your hormones. And those are usually the symptoms that most people can identify with. They're like, oh, I'm getting irritable and cranky before my period. I'm having, heavy bleeds or XYZ or my breast tenderness. And sometimes that is just a hormonal issue, but oftentimes with hormones, there's an underlying issue, right? And so it's really important to figure that out. Right. But I think there's so many women out there and men that have similar stories to you that, you're raising little kids. Maybe you don't have as much help at home as you'd like. You might be in a stressful work environment, and you
feel terrible, but like you said, you did what you had to do to keep going, right? And so if you're listening to that and that's kind of you know, keep doing what you're doing. Obviously, you got to keep going, but there might be other options that you could explore that could get you off of medications that kind of keep you in that loop. Like prednisone, for you know, it's not great for your gut health nor your hormones, right? Yes, it makes you feel better, but it will crash out your adrenals. It puts your system in kind of chronic fight flight, which is going to take a toll on the gut. And so then it's like, you're just like this chicken egg thing, you know, this cycle that keeps perpetuating itself and you feel stuck.
Yeah. Like I didn't realize, I mean, I was having my cycle every 19 days for 9 days and I was literally a psycho, like psycho
that's so
raging.
Much bleeding.
I was all the time. And I just thought, okay, I'm perimenopausal. Like I didn't actually equate it to the medication, but in the gut
and the gut stuff,
the gut health. And 3 to 4 months in on addressing my gut health, my cycle regulated back to 24 days.
That's amazing.
And my periods were like 2 to 4 days. And I really haven't had PMS since. I mean, I have, you know, one day where I'm a little bit cranky, but it's not like to the extent.
Like it was.
Yeah. I mean, that was like really bad.
And that's hard really when you are working and taking care of a home and taking care of your
little
kids.
Ones,
and if you're getting a cycle every 2 to 3 weeks, it's like you have 1 week maybe where you feel good, right? Which that's not a long term.
No, and it's not good for your relationship. It's not. I wasn't a nice mommy, you know, and my poor kids. Like, thankfully that changed, and but it was hard. It was really hard.
So let's maybe just dive right into. I mean, you know. How does, from your perspective, how does the gut health impact hormones? I mean, there's a lot of different nuances here, but let's get into that.
Right. Well, I just think if your gut is not, so we have billions and billions of bacteria in our gut, and ideally we should have about 250 different strains of bacteria. You know, in indigenous cultures, they have like 450 strains, right? But in our antibacterial, you know, like very sterile world that we try to live in since the pandemic, a lot of us are walking around with about 100 strains, and those bacteria in our gut, they control our metabolism. They help with estrogen recycling in our gut. They help with everything, really producing melatonin, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, like all the neurotransmitters that help with regulating our mood and our sleep, and all of that influences your hormones, you know? And so when all of it's out of whack and you don't have the right bugs or bacteria in your gut to carry out the functions, your body's not going to function the way it's supposed to.
Well, and I think maybe we can dive a little bit more into, like, you mentioned, like, the bacteria that help with estrogen recycling. That's a big problem that we see a lot, right? So if you're lacking the bugs that help do that, or if you have an overgrowth of certain bugs, your estrogen metabolism is not working properly, right? And estrogen you know, the body, it's always building estrogen, but then your liver has to break it down. And a lot of hormonal dysregulation will come from buildup of too much of one hormone and then not enough of another one. And so we can see a lot of estrogen dominant type situations, right? If you're not breaking down that estrogen in the gut. And this is something we can test for, which is cool. Like, why don't you talk a little bit about the testing that you do? Right.
So one of the tests, well, the only test that I use because I love it so much, is called the Biome-FX test. It's put out by Microbiome Labs, and it looks at your gut bacterial diversity. How many strains are in there? So it compares you to a typical population. The whole test is based on, like, what's the average that we should see. So it looks at how many strains you have, how diverse those strains are. So we are meant to have a community in our gut, right? So we want a variety of players like we want in our community. We don't just want a bunch of doctors and teachers, right? We need all the people that carry out all the different occupations to help our community run smoothly. Our gut is exactly the same. And so we want diversity not only in numbers, but also in quality and quantity and how they work together. And if they're not working together, you can see that in this test. There are specific keystone species that you need that if they're not present, the gut, the pathogens and other not so good bacteria are going to get in there and take over. And we do need a certain number of pathogen, we call it pathogenic or bad bacteria. We need a few of them in there to carry out some metabolism of certain types of, like, some proteins and things like that. And they also help us with immunity.
But that's usually like lower levels,
very small,
right? I feel like what we see often is, like, when you don't have the right community, as you're talking about, you're missing, let's say you've only 100 species instead of the 450 or the 250 that we need. you get those bad guys will overgrow too much, like yeast, for example, right? Like yeast is, you're supposed to have a little bit of it, but if you don't have enough of the players that kind of keep it at bay, you get an overgrowth of yeast. And I'm sure anyone listening, yeast is not a great one. We don't want to have an overgrowth of it.
That can lead to like intense sugar cravings, brain fog. There's so many things that actually an overgrowth of yeast, skin issues. I mean, it's related to so many things, hormonal imbalance. And you can even have too many numbers of the keystone species. So if you have too much of a good thing,
like too much lactobacillus, for example,
that can make you more anxious depending on the strain. The strains are all numbered. I mean, it's like very, very.
It's a very detailed test, right? It comes with like so many different things, but you get such valuable insight.
So it helps you to understand also how your body is metabolizing carbohydrates. Carbohydrates, are the preferred food, specifically resistant starches like vegetable starches, things like that, vegetable carbohydrates. They're the primary food source for the good bacteria. So this tells us whether our gut bacteria is metabolizing it correctly or if it's producing byproducts that are inflammatory. Same thing with proteins. It tells, we have a huge, and eating a lot of protein is really important, but some people eat too much protein and then you have all this excessive inflammatory stuff.
And it's from when the bugs go to eat it. Either, like you said, they're breaking down the carbohydrates properly and you don't have any problems, or they don't break them down so well and you get these like byproducts that it's just like build up waste in your system, and that makes you feel like crap. Right.
And it can build up gases, methane and all kinds of kinds of things that are just really, really hard on the gut and can cause leaky gut. It does tell us kind of how the gut barrier is working and the mucosal barrier. And if you have too many of the good bacteria, sometimes they'll eat the mucosal barrier. So we have to be feeding. It's so important for us to be getting the right amounts of fiber. So a lot of restrictive diets don't allow for that. And then these bacteria are starving and they end up eating the gut lining. And then we end up with leaky gut.
I mean, and I think this is a common thing that we see. We get patients that come in and they're like, wow, I can't tolerate carbohydrates. They'll give us a list of all the foods they can't tolerate. And, and the more you don't eat those foods and you don't address the gut bacteria, you're just the number of foods you can eat will get smaller and smaller because you will increase the leaky gut situation. And so, a healthy gut microbiome, you should be able to tolerate most food, unless you have an allergy, or you have celiac, something. But most of the time, if you're struggling with food, yes, the food is causing the problems, but the food actually isn't the problem. The problem is your microbiome is not in a good place.
Right. That's where I was. I mean, I could literally eat chicken and rice. That was it. Everything else made me bloated, gassy, terrible. It was disgusting, honestly. Like, not
didn't feel good
to be around me. No, but now I can eat anything, for the most part. I mean, I'm supposed to avoid dairy because it's inflammatory, specifically for my system, but I can eat it in limited quantities because your gut is in a much better place.
Well, and how much nicer is that in life? Like, you don't have to be so restrictive. And I always talk to patients about this, like, when you're on a really restrictive diet, it can be really stressful. And if you're already dealing with a lot of stress and then we make food become even more stressful, we're kind of get, again, caught in this really not so great loop.
So the other thing that the gut test tells us is it tells us how our body is absorbing nutrients, specifically B vitamins, and vitamin D, vitamin K, specific ones that are really, really important for our overall functioning. It tells us how our gut, whether it has histamine, high histamine levels or not, it has adequate GABA production to help with mood and stress regulation. And it also tells us how the gut is recycling estrogen, like you said earlier. So, excuse me, what we often see is there are really high levels of estrogen in the gut. So we need to
help the body break that down. And a lot of, there's so many patients that have conditions like endometriosis and other, they seem like they're GYN or like gynecological conditions, but a lot of those can come from microbiome dysregulation because of what we're talking about with this estrogen metabolism. So if you've got really high levels of estrogen in the gut, you have receptors for estrogen all over the body. If there's too much estrogen there and the body can't break it down, you're going to start to see a lot of symptoms of high estrogen all over the body. And what's interesting, it's been great having Carrie, running these tests, is sometimes we'll run blood work labs, and estrogen levels look normal. They don't look elevated. But then when we go and we run this test, it's like, oh, no, wait, actually. And oftentimes they're having symptoms of high estrogen. And it's kind of like, wait, well, why is their estrogen not showing high? But when we look at it in the gut, they're having symptoms of high estrogen because of the gut not breaking it down. So it's just another, I think it's a really big kind of a missing piece or missing link that often gets missed. And I'll admit there's been times in practice that I was like, and this here's what's interesting. I think a lot of patients, I'll ask about their bowel movements, and their bowel movements may be maybe normal.
Fine.
Right?
Yeah,
they're like,
yeah.
I have a bowel movement every day. Like, and they don't report a lot of symptoms there, but they're reporting symptoms elsewhere. So they're kind of like, well, this couldn't be about my gut.
Right.
But then when we kind of try to, peel back the layers and figure, well, what's the underlying cause of this? It can come back to gut dysregulation. And it's interesting. I think, low carb and keto and the carnivore diet are pretty, popular right now. People are into those diets. And yes, they can be great for a short period of time, but long term, the impact they have on your gut is not amazing.
Right. Because you're not feeding the gut bacteria.
You're not feeding the gut bacteria.
Yeah.
And there are supplements and things you can do to do that if you have to be on that diet. But I think we both kind of agree that it's not really great long term.
Long term, yeah. But that's the thing. It's like people feel great in the moment, but over time, that starvation of the gut bacteria is just going to come back, I think, to bite people.
Yeah.
Because those bacteria need food.
Yes. Well, and I think it's an interesting sign if you are someone that your bowels are relatively normal, but you feel so much better not eating carbs, you feel much better on a more paleo or keto diet. That is a really good indicator that your gut health is not where it should be.
Right.
That you don't have the right microbiome to break down carbohydrates.
Right.
And so when you do eat them, you break them down, you're getting all these bad byproducts that make you feel like crap.
Right.
So, so that's a really good indicator is you feel like, hey, I can't, I eat any sort of carbohydrate and I feel either I fall asleep or, I get really cranky or I get bloated. That's a sign that probably you need to dig a little deeper into your gut health.
Well, and I think it's important, as you said, it's not always GI distress. Some people will feel anxious, irritable. Some people get foggy brained. That's how I feel when I eat dairy. I don't necessarily get GI distress. I get brain fog. I get puffy eyes. I wake up the next morning, my eyelids are puffy.
Yeah.
Seriously? Why? Come on. It's not fair.
I will get, my dairy usually gives me these giant under the skin pimples.
Really?
Which, sometimes it's worth it if I don't have to be on camera or anything for a while. But they suck and they take 2 weeks to go away. So I was like, well, is it worth the dairy? Maybe not.
Yeah.
But yes,
and chronic pain is another one. In the hands in particular is what I've found with people.
And we see that a lot. And skin stuff too, right? Rashes and so if you're listening, you're like, oh yeah, that's me, but my stools are normal. Maybe you might want to look into, especially if, here's the other thing, if you've tried a lot of different things, if you've tried a lot of different medications, if you've tried a lot of different diets and you're just not seeing the change in your body that you would like, and you haven't addressed your gut health, it's probably time to think about that.
Right.
Because as you're listening, it has an impact on everything.
Yeah.
And I love your analogy of kind of it needs to be a community. You have to have enough of the things. Right. And, it's kind of interesting. When you were saying that, I was thinking how all of us didn't really feel that great during the pandemic when we weren't really a part of a community. We were all isolated in our own place, and think about depression, anxiety, all these things skyrocketed. We are as humans, we're designed to be a part of a community. Our gut kind of reflects that, right?
Yes.
We're supposed to be in community. Yes. We're supposed to have all the different players that do all the different roles.
Right. And you have to have a community that's working together.
Yes.
And if they're not working together, there's all this stress and all this, discomfort.
Yeah.
I know in my training, she gave kind of an analogy of that grumpy old uncle that you have in your family, and everybody tolerates them because they love him, love him, but you wouldn't want 20 of that uncle, right? So the fun, exciting, fun-filled family is great if you have one grumpy uncle, but if you have a family of a lot of grumpy uncles, you don't really want to be around that. No,
you're going to leave. You're going to jump. So the good bacteria are going to go somewhere else, right?
Yes. So that's kind of what, we like to think of it as we want what we call is a symbiotic, everybody working together.
Yeah.
That's just.
Yeah. Well, let's maybe talk about some of the things, we can both share experience of what can put your gut into a place where it's not super healthy, right? Obviously most of us are born with pretty good gut health, but I think you touched on it earlier, we live in a pretty sterile environment, right?
Right.
With all the cleaning stuff and antibiotics and all the things we do to kill things has an impact on our gut microbiome. So and that's a big piece, and that's just kind of the way society is.
Right.
I mean, antibiotics are another big piece. If you've had to take antibiotics, I usually ask patients, I'm like, what's your antibiotic use? And if they'll tell me, if it's more than 2 times in the previous couple of years, probably your gut flora has taken
They say it takes about 6 months to rebuild gut flora from one round of antibiotics.
Which is a long time, right?
It's a long time because we're eating food that's kind of fighting against it. So the quality of our food is another thing, right? Because we have so many artificial sugars and all these additives
that are fighting and everything.
That are kind of fighting against the good bacteria.
Yeah.
But it can, and then if you end up, I know a lot of people who are on antibiotics probably once every 6 months.
Oh,
so
yeah.
then you
or
never
they take them daily in low doses for things like rosacea or for acne or for chronic UTIs. And that's something I see a lot. Patients will come and they're like, oh, I've been taking this low dose of doxycycline for 10 years. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
You know, we definitely need to do some work on your gut health. Yeah. And, you know, sometimes you have to do that. You know, I'm not saying not to do that, but it definitely has an impact on your gut health.
Right.
And then there's also, you know, dehydration is a big one that, you know, we see a lot of. And that could be either you're not drinking enough water or you're taking medications that dehydrate you, right? So like any of the allergy medications, so Benadryl or Claritin, all of those things dehydrate you at a cellular level. So they're going to dehydrate the cells that line the small intestine. You know, they dry you up. Their mucus, they dry up the mucous membranes, which is, you know, the nasal cavity, which is great if you have a sinus infection or a cold, but it's not so great for the gut health.
Lining,
So that's a really common one I see that patients don't even realize. Like, so if you're taking Claritin every day or Benadryl to sleep or whatever it is, you are definitely having a negative impact on your gut health. So, you know, working towards finding a more natural solution for that could be really beneficial for the gut. I find, you know, it's funny, they'll tell you when you do the food allergy testing, they're like, if you take Claritin or Benadryl, any of those allergies, it will make you look like you have leaky gut. It basically gives you leaky gut. Right. And you'll show sensitive to like every single food you test for because it is compromising the mucous membrane of the gut lining. Right. Which, if you think about it, it's actually going to make allergies worse, which like makes me so mad. Because all these people taking, it will make your seasonal or whatever your allergies you're taking for, it makes it worse because it'll create leaky mucus membranes in your nasal cavity too. So
and I've seen colleagues and clients all like who have had like a history of asthma, let's say. I had one friend who was working, you know, we were kind of working together, and she basically could not go a day without using her inhaler. She started work on her gut health and ultimately ditched that inhaler and was able to run a marathon. Amazing. You know, and her doctor was like, what do you call it? The pulmonologist. I'm like, what are they called? He was like, what happened? Like, what have you been doing? And she said, I just addressed my gut health. And it really does. Seasonal allergies. I mean, so many things are influenced by your gut. So it's crazy.
Yeah. So dehydration,
stress,
antibiotics, and stress. I mean, stress is probably the biggest one.
And I think, you know, people don't realize like that doesn't just mean being in a stressful work environment, or that can be your internal dialogue. Yes. You know, the stressful thoughts that you think day in and day out, chronically being on your phone while you're eating. You know, I have to coach a lot of my clients to just put themselves, because you can't be, you know, a lot of us are in fight or flight and we don't even really know it. And you can't be. What the opposite of that is rest and digest. And that's kind of where you need to be for the blood flow and all the enzymes to be flowing when you are digesting food. So if you're in fight or flight, nothing, you know, no blood's flowing to your internal organs. You're not getting movement of the food through the system very well. And a lot of people end up with, you know, GI issues and gut health issues because of this chronic state of stress they're in.
And I think it's a great point you brought up. Some people are like, oh, I'm not stressed. I don't have any stress.
Yeah,
my life's great. I have a great job. I have great kids. I have a great relationship. I'm not financially stressed. But if your internal dialogue, as you mentioned, is worry all the time, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what's not. So if you're worrying all the time, it's going to be like, well, I should be in fight flight because she's worried about that. Or he's worried about that. So yeah, it's an interesting, like, it's a good process to like really go and figure out, hey, what could potentially be keeping me in a stress state? Right. Because if you're having, let's just face it, if you were having any sort of chronic health issue, chances are your system is probably spending too much time in fight flight. 100%. And so it's it's a good thing to just take an inventory of, hey, like, what could be keeping me stressed? Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think like 99% of the time, there's that underlying issue.
Yeah, and it has an impact on, you know, blood flow and enzymes, you know, and that's the biggest way it has an impact on the gut. But also when your body's in fight flight, your pH will change slightly, right? So your pH will become slightly more acidic. Right. And the pH, I always think of it as like the weather. So it's like the weather that is in your gut. And our gut likes to have a pH of around 7.4, which is just slightly alkaline. If your pH goes down even just a tiny bit, like 7.39, which is very, very small, but that completely changes the weather, which means it's going to change which bugs can thrive and which bugs can't.
Exactly. Yeah. I used often like a fish tank analogy. Like, you know, our guts are like a fish tank. You know, the structure needs to be intact. The water needs to be clean. The pH levels need to be right. Yeah. the fish need to be friendly. They can't be killing each
Yeah.
other. You know, so it's the filters need to be working, our liver and our kidneys, you know, all of that needs to be intact for our body to be functioning smoothly.
Yeah.
So
let's maybe switch gears and talk a little bit about, okay, so you're listening, you're like, okay, I feel like my gut health is out of whack. What do I do next? Like, what's the first step? Yeah, so you can definitely come see us, but I think testing is a really good place to start. I mean, you can work on your gut with some of the things we've talked about, like working on lowering stress levels, working on making sure you're hydrated properly, like, you know, but I think if you really want to get nitty gritty and like figure out like, hey, which probiotics should I be taking?
Right.
What should I do with my diet and, you know, to get me to a place where I can eat more foods, you know, doing a test that looks at your gut health is really, really valuable.
Yeah, definitely. And looking at your diet, you know, diet is huge. And a lot of the times, you know, our glucose metabolism is just all over the place. And that fuels consumption of sugar and things that will feed that bad bacteria. So getting that in line is really helpful as well. But the test definitely will tell us, okay, well, this is who's in there. Yeah. This is what they're doing.
This is who's not in there. We got to add this guy in.
This is what's missing, and this is how you need to get there. Yeah. The test does yield. It gives, you know, supplemental recommendations. It gives lifestyle, because there are things that influence the gut bacteria, including, do you meditate? Do you exercise vigorously for, you know, 4 days a week? Like that impacts how certain bacteria thrive and don't thrive. Yeah. So it's interesting. And then just, you know, obviously the things that we're putting in and on our body as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the like recommendations for a healthy gut would be just basic lifestyle, right? Like living a healthy lifestyle. But
that's confusing.
It is confusing. You know? It's very confusing. It's confusing. Like what is a healthy lifestyle?
Yeah. Because, you know, culture doesn't really, what is deemed healthy is not necessarily healthy.
The best. Yeah.
It's so hard. It's really hard. I mean, just looking at labels, like I was doing a little presentation the other day about just looking at labels and how sugar, you know, we kind of learned, you know, the first ingredient is the most abundant ingredient. So if sugar's the first ingredient, you don't want to eat that food, right? But now they are putting foods out with different names. You know, there's about 50 sneaky names for sugar, and they're listed in different ways. So you could have 6 different types of sugar listed in an ingredient list. And if somebody doesn't know that those are sugar, they're just like, oh, that looks good. That looks good. You know, some things look good even though you don't know what they are. So
it is a little tricky.
It is very tricky.
With packaged foods, it gets tricky. Especially, I mean, I think it's better if you're going to go for a packaged food, try to find one that has the least amount of ingredients, right?
Yeah.
Like the fewer ingredients, the better it's going to be.
For sure. Yeah.
And, you know, when you go shop on the periphery of the grocery store, like, the less packaged foods, the better.
Yeah.
Which is not always easy, right? Like that's why, you know, I think to your point, like this isn't easy. This is
That's why,
which is why it's helpful to have a practitioner guide you through this and help figure out what's best for you. I think the other thing that's hard in today's age, and I talk about this a lot on the show, is there's so much information out there, right?
So much,
You can get on and you can Google just about anything, and you can watch your favorite influencers, and they're doing this and telling you to do this, and you know, ads are telling you to buy this supplement. And you're like, what am I supposed to do?
I know.
Is this good for gut health? Is this good for gut health? But again, I think finding someone to help walk you through this journey is really, really helpful.
Yeah.
And you know, I know Carrie works with people like doing the testing, helping with their diet, like getting into all of the aspects of like what could be impacting your gut and how are we going to unwind that to, you know, get your gut in a better place. And you know, as we were touching on earlier, there's so many different symptoms that can be a sign that your gut health is off. But when you get it in balance, like, you know, Carrie shared her story, it's amazing amazing how your body can change.
Yeah.
And how much more food you can eat, and like how much you can, like, life becomes a lot more fuller and richer, and when you're not so limited to things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, a lot of the symptoms that I was experiencing, I thought were related to perimenopause, but also just getting older. Yeah. And I'm going to tell you right now, it doesn't have to suck to get older. Yes. And you know, I like that you brought up the perimenopause thing. You know, I think it's really hot in social media right now. Everyone's like, oh, are you having these problems? It must be perimenopause. And yes, your hormones do start to change in your 40s decade, but I think we're seeing more symptoms because of all the what's happening in our gut health, and because of all the stress and what impacts that has everywhere. But you know, I feel like 15 years ago, like women had, you know, were struggled with menopause, but perimenopause wasn't quite a thing. It wasn't like, and I think about like what we've all been through in the last 4 years. I mean, our bodies are still recovering from the stress of, you know, what transpired during that fun COVID time. Right. And that had a major impact on all of our gut health. It was funny. I feel like
end of 2021, early 2022, I had so many patients with SIBO, so many like chronic, when SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. We've done a couple episodes on it, but and that's like the ultimate expression of really bad gut dysregulation, right? You've got a really bad overgrowth. You've got all those crazy cranky uncles. It's like too many of those cranky uncles.
And they're all in the wrong place.
They're all in the wrong place and they're pissing everybody off and you feel horrible. But it was weird. It was like all out of the, and I think it was just, and stress can definitely set you up for SIBO, if you're chronically not getting enough blood flow there, if the pH has been off for a long time. But it was really interesting to see that hitting so many of my patients kind of at the same time. And I think it was just
so much fear.
So much fear. Yeah. And it was just, no matter what was going on in your life, you had that stress and then you had the extra added stress of that fun time.
Yeah. Yeah. And diets probably weren't great.
Well, diets were not great. There was a lot of alcohol consumption, and which we kind of all had to get through that time. So we don't have to like beat ourselves up about what we did or didn't do during. There was that whole banana bread baking phase. I sadly missed out on that. I was here seeing patients, and I'm like, man, I want to be home making banana bread
and sourdough. Sourdough's come back, but
yeah. But our bodies have been through a lot, and I think I think our society doesn't really let us take a break. We're constantly like, well, no, it's okay. It's almost like. I was watching some show and I think they were like addressing the pandemic time and it was kind of like they were like glazed over it like it wasn't really that big of a deal.
Yeah.
I was like,
it was a big deal.
It was a big deal. So
we were stuck in our houses.
I think everyone's like, oh, it's back to normal. Well, it's really only been 4 years. I mean, not even that long since it kind of ended. Anyways, we don't need to dive into that anymore. But the point is, our systems have been through a lot more stress than any other, times that in the last recent history. So. All right, we've kind of touched on a lot of things about gut health here. Let's talk about working with you. What is it? What does it look like? What kind of things do you help people with?
Well, so a lot of what we talked about today. I do look. I take obviously a holistic approach to. So I look at not only your physical health. So like, are you exercise? What are you doing for movement? What are you doing for hydration, nutrition, sleep? All of those areas. But I also look at emotional, mental, spiritual, all of those areas. So looking at the thoughts that you have consciously, subconsciously, I look at your internal dialogue, I look at your relationships, how you cope, what we can change, what coping mechanisms can we change and make a little bit more user-friendly, really, to help your body as opposed to go work against your body. Just diving into all those areas. I have meal plans that are, I love the gut restoration protocol that I use, but I also have a low inflammatory food. The gut restoration protocol basically removes the most inflammatory foods. So alcohol, caffeine, gluten, dairy, artificial sugars, processed foods, sugar. It sounds like a lot.
Things that feed the bad bacteria and that don't allow the good ones to grow.
Yeah, and it's really short term. Yeah. So it's more for data collection and more for figuring out what's affecting you, because a lot of people are like, oh, I just cut out gluten, when really they might have a dairy issue. Mm-hmm. And sometimes when they cut out gluten, they're eating a lot of processed gluten-free stuff, things that are packed with sugar, and they don't realize it's the sugars that are bothering them. So it's really a time period where we remove those things, take data, and then slowly reintroduce to see where people feel their best. Yeah. The meal plans. You're eating more food.
But wait, let me pause you right there. Yeah. You're removing that, but at the same time, you're also rebuilding their gut flora so that eventually they can tolerate that better, right?
Yes, 100%. Yes.
And sometimes you have to remove that stuff in order to really get the gut back into a good place.
Well, yeah, and what I compare it to is like we're chronically assaulting our gut. Yeah. Every single day. We might start off good, but then, we'll have a sugar-filled caffeine drink in the middle of the day, and then our gut is like all over the place, So it's really removing the constant assault on the gut so that the gut lining can heal, so that the gut bacteria the good gut bacteria can start to thrive. The food that is eaten during that time is often very rich in probiotics, prebiotics. We use some supplements if the person wants. We don't always have to. I think that they're really great at supporting the repair and restoration of the gut, but I don't require it, and working on all the other things, like how removing stress management. There's so much that we work on in that time. Yeah. right now we're starting a metabolic reset group.
Yep.
That is really looking at improving glucose metabolism, so helping balance out the blood sugars. That's another thing I do in my coaching, is just really teach strategies to help balance blood sugars throughout the day, so that you're not having these chronic peaks and valleys. I like to call it the glucose roller coaster, where we're like going up and down and crashing, and have peaks of energy and then crashes, because that really contributes to inflammation all over the body. And so if we can keep those peaks and valleys from happening, we can reduce inflammation, really calm the system overall. So working on, those strategies. So in the metabolic reset group, we're doing that. We're working on reducing inflammation systemically throughout the body and really helping to feed that good gut bacteria.
Yeah. And I think essentially the goal for our participants in that program is getting their community back together in their gut, right? So that then they can go, after doing that program, it really does give you a gut reset.
Yeah.
So it allows you to go and maybe tolerate foods you might not have been tolerating before, and not have as many GI issues, but also brain fog, and lessens bloating, and helps with sleep, and helps with energy. And because, when you get that in a good place, you feel so much better.
Right.
And so that's a 4-week program, and it's fantastic. It's really manageable. It's, it's a weekly group meeting. And
you get a full meal plan with recipes, ingredient list, shopping list. You don't even have to
do anything
except read the paper and go shopping.
It's
and then follow the recipes.
Yeah, it's pretty easy.
And people have, I've eaten a number of the, I've worked with a nutritionist to create these plans, and I've eaten a ton of the recipes, and they're really good. But when I get it from other people, because I think a lot of things are good that a lot of people don't, because I'm used to eating really healthy. So people are like, if you say it's good, it might not actually be. But when I have people who are used to eating pretty decadent foods tell me, I feel so satisfied.
Yeah.
And it's so much food, but it's so good, and they're losing weight.
Yeah.
You are ultimately going to lose weight when you repair your gut.
Oh, 100%.
Or if you're somebody who's malnourished and need to gain weight, then you're going to gain weight. But usually it's the people, that obviously.
Yeah. And a lot of it, initially, it's not necessarily, for the first week or so, it's not necessarily fat loss, but puffiness will go down, bloating will go down, your lymphatic system will get a little bit better because of what we're doing in the gut. And so, we're both doing it this month, and it feels fantastic. It feels really good.
Yeah.
We will run the program again in January. So we'll put links in the show notes where you can click the link in the bio. If you're watching this, you can register for that now and get going, to start your new year off right. It's a really great program to do in January.
Yeah. And it's a great community, just a lot of support. Everybody's excited to share their wins. That we really like to focus on the wins and just kind of what, okay, now what was your challenge, and go out this week and work on that. So it's really
it's nice to do this with a group of people, because sometimes if you're making major diet changes or adding supplements, you're like, wow, this is a little bit overwhelming, but it's nice to have people to touch base with and be like, oh yeah, cool. Or even make friends, if you're local. And, so what else?
Well, if you're not into group programs, you can definitely work with me individually. We're doing an 8-session, the gut restoration protocol. You don't have to do the gut restoration protocol, but working with me with the goal of restoring your gut in a certain way. So when I say you don't need to do gut restoration protocol, some people will only cut out certain things. I'm going to tell you right now, you probably won't get the full results. The people who really do cut everything out for the that short amount of time, they really learn a lot about what's affecting their bodies. Yeah. But you can still make changes just by, cutting sugar out, cutting artificial sugars. I mean, going to whole foods over processed foods, your body is going to be so much happier. Yeah. So in the one-on-one sessions, we really work together. You get me one-on-one. So it's great.
It's great to have the group support's different, but this is like a one-on-one support place, which what I've found in my years of working with patients one-on-one is having someone to come and just where it's all about you is so helpful, especially if you're a busy mom, if you've got kids, if you've got a crazy work schedule and you find that you're not getting supported. This is a great place to let your nervous system relax, which is ultimately going to allow your gut to heal a little bit faster.
Right.
So it's definitely good to work with someone, which you guys know I talk about that all the time on the show. Make sure you're getting the support you need. But if you're interested in working with Carrie one-on-one, you can book a free consult and chat with her and see if it feels like a good fit. The other thing is you want to make sure when you're working with someone that it feels like a good fit. So
definitely. I highly recommend doing the discovery call.
And then tell us about your podcast.
I have a podcast called Thrive with Carrie, and it is basically geared towards women in midlife, but I have had some of the dads on my baseball team tell me they want to
I'm sure they do.
I think they want to help their wives.
Yeah, totally.
Cool.
Or they might want to help themselves too, right?
Themselves,
like, not just women.
Yeah. So talking a lot about gut health, talking just topics pertaining to women in midlife, really.
That's awesome. Yeah.
I had my son recently on the podcast.
I saw that. I need to listen to that. I bet that was
13,
so fun.
And he had a day off from school, and I was like, hey, dude, you want to be on my podcast? And it was so fun because we talked about ways to manage stress at home.
Yeah.
And because I think because I'm a health coach and I do a lot of this stuff, like my kids just naturally know. My in-laws were with the kids this weekend, and my mother-in-law was feeling really tired because she had eaten a ton of just carbohydrates all morning. Yeah. And my 13-year-old was like, Nana, you need to eat some protein.
Oh, I love that.
He's like
good study.
You didn't have any protein today. I was like, oh, they actually listened to me. It's so nice.
That's
but
really
yeah,
good.
so a bunch of different topics as far as gut health. I just recently had somebody who specializes in ADHD. I've had you on my podcast. Yeah. So there's just all kinds of hormones. Yeah. So yeah, it's awesome. It's fun. Yeah. So check it out. Thrive with Carrie.
Yeah, check it out. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you so much for being on the show again. It was fantastic. You can guys, again, if you want to work with her, you can book a free consult. Go check out her show if you want to get more of a feel for her. And thank you guys for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to connect with me on social media to find more helpful tips and information. You can find me at Dr. Kinney on all of the platforms. And please be sure to subscribe and leave a rating and/or a review. This helps grow the show so more people have access to this knowledge that leads to empowered healing. Love and light, and see you next week.